Hello everyone, welcome back to Geology 106. Today we're going to be talking about glaciers. The time is currently 2:53 and we will start at 3 o'clock as usual. So, how was everyone's weekend? I am currently pulling up a video that we're going to watch today about glaciers. Let's see if I found the right video. I have the link on my computer, but I don't have it like on my phone necessarily. And pulling up Google Slides is somewhat difficult. Let's see, do I want to watch this video in class actually? Now that I'm re-looking at it, I'm like, oh, this is super long. I don't know if I want to do it for a live stream, because doing something for a live stream versus doing it in class is kind of different. You know, do I want to show a 5-minute video on a live stream, or is very different than showing it in class. I will maybe just take a poll and see if we want to watch it in class or not, because it is like 5 minutes, at least the portion that we're going to watch. We would watch about a little over 5 minutes of it. But I'll leave that up to you guys, because I have never been on the other end of a live stream class, and I don't fully know what the experience is like for you guys. So we'll see how you guys feel about watching a 5-minute video later on. But you caught the microwave on fire. That actually must have been really terrifying, Echo, as like funny as it sounds. That also was probably very terrifying. But I hope everything was okay with the microwave. Was it? Is everybody all right? Is hopefully not damage to the kitchen beyond the microwave itself? As a child, when I was home alone with my siblings and 1 or 2 other children, like my mother's coworkers' kids, this was like 6 a.m. We were waiting for the nanny to come along, because she didn't usually get there until about 7 or 8 or so. I don't remember. I was too little. I was very little. And we had Pop-Tarts in the pantry, which we never had. And I told my mom's coworker's child, or, my friend, like, here's how you do a Pop-Tart. Just, throw it in the microwave for a few seconds and call it a day. I was more of a microwave person. And she didn't take it out of the metal wrapper, and she just threw the Pop-Tarts in the microwave and put it on for like several minutes instead of several seconds. And I look back as we're all watching TV, because it's been a while and the microwave's still going, and the Pop-Tart's literally in the microwave on fire, and it's just us kids home. So we got it out though. Everything was fine. And yeah, the microwave still worked. It was fine. I don't know that we even told anybody. Let's see. You guys are getting a new microwave. Oh man, that sounds so scary though, Echo. Like, but hopefully, like I said, hopefully there's no damage to like the kitchen or anything else. Excuse me. But geez, microwave fires, goodness. But yeah, the fire, no damage. Good. Excellent. Gosh, that house that I grew up in, there's another time where my sister and her friends kind of, I don't know if it was with the microwave or if it was just the stove, but they also caused flames somehow in the kitchen, and it sort of singed like the pantry that's like the two cupboards that were over like the stove and then the microwave, and then there were some cabinets right above it. Sort of blackened one of them. I had an excellent childhood. But yeah, that sounds like a very exciting weekend. Hopefully you guys don't have to go for too long without a microwave. But in lieu of a microwave, you can't always use like the oven to heat things up. It's just longer. But looks like we've got 4 people. How was everyone else's weekend? Toaster oven superior. My husband is in the toaster oven gang. I haven't really gotten used to a toaster oven though, because I never had one growing up. So glad to hear that you had a decent weekend. I also had a weekend that was really busy with family, but it was nice. We had a very fun. On Saturday, I went all the way to Olympia, so spent like 3 or so hours on the road on Saturday. My aunt had a birthday party in Olympia. They, her and my uncle have a driveway that is kind of like you pull in and there's a loop and then it goes out. And my uncle surprised her by inviting all of her friends from all over to come down to Olympia and drive through the loop in their cars and wave and wish her happy birthday. So, yeah, that was a fun way of social distancing, doing birthdays for social distancing. And different cars had like balloons on them as they drove around and stuff. It's really fun. Yeah, so excellent way to do a social distancing birthday gathering. So, and it was great too, because people who did get out of the car, literally everyone was standing 6 feet apart from each other. So interesting times. All right, well, let's see. I suspect we only have 4 viewers. I suspect that we'll probably get a few more trickling in. But I did want to make an announcement and let you guys know that I haven't posted the Glaciers focus questions yet. I will be posting those though later this evening. I just haven't quite gotten the chance to. I have most of the focus questions, but I need to add to them, add to what I've already written and go through the book and find what questions would be most beneficial for you guys to guide you through the reading, because I don't just pick them like arbitrarily. They're really very much straight out of the book and walk you through the reading. So I will get those posted this evening for sure. It may be after dinner though, so thanks for understanding that I like to eat dinner. But yeah, today we're going to be talking about glaciers. The reason I enjoy talking about glaciers is because when I was probably in 11th grade, I think, I was about to go into my senior year. It was summertime, and I had some relatives who lived in Alaska, went up to see them, and flying back, I had the window seat, and I was looking out over, we were probably in parts of northern Canada by that point, but I don't know. I was looking out, and the glaciers that I was looking at outside the window were so massive. It seemed like they just went on forever, and that the mountain peaks were just poking up out the surface of them. And how gigantic these features were. This ice was, and the fact that it just went on for miles and practically, inundated the whole landscape, was was just, it blew my mind that something could kind of be that big. You know, I was still fairly young and hadn't really traveled too much. So like seeing the glaciers that were just so gigantic. I'd never seen anything so geographically large before, that, you know, ice. Anyways, so that's why I enjoy talking about glaciers. I will also post a link to your guys's PowerPoint. It looks a little bit different. The skin of this PowerPoint looks different, and that is because it's actually a PowerPoint from my other class that was heavily based off the PowerPoint I initially made for this class. However, I went back and I looked at the first PowerPoint that I made for this, and I was like, this is trash. The new one is so much better, and it covers all the same stuff, slightly different, you know, just slightly different presentation, I guess, not different information. And so it's like, I'm not going to reformat the whole thing. I'm just going to use the one I have because it's excellent as it is. So the style of the PowerPoint is completely different. It has like a blue stripe on the side instead of orange, whatever. And it says like a different publisher at the bottom of it, like copyright. We're using right now we're using Lutkins and Tarback, but this is kind of based off of both Lutkins and Tarback, as well as what's the other guy's name? Well, I could just look at the PowerPoint and tell you. His name is, I don't have his name, but it's from a different publishing company. He's from Norton. They're also a great publishing company too. I like them. Anyways, been to Glacier Bay. I haven't been to enough places like Glacier Bay. I need to go to Glacier Bay. I need to get out more. But in any case, let's go ahead and start chatting about glaciers. And then the first picture there on the slide that I posted kind of captures a little bit what I was seeing when I looked outside my window while I was flying over Alaska and Canada, and that there were just these massive amounts of ice that nearly covered the landscape and went on as far as I could see. And I was just blown away by it. Let's see. How many people do we have? We're at 5 now. Oh, good. Well, hopefully some more join in a bit. Hopefully they join soon. But first, let's talk about what a glacier is. Let's define a glacier. Give you guys a nice working definition for it. So the broadest definition, which you guys can put at the top of slide 2 with the first bullet point, is that a glacier is a thick mass of ice. Surprising, I know. It really kind of is that simple when you're thinking in broad senses. And then some kind of further bullet points that you guys can add on to that. Was it not? Was what not? I missed it. But the next sub bullet point that you guys can write down is that kind of just a bit more nuanced, is that it's the accumulation, compaction, and recrystallization of snow and turning it into ice. Now, glacial ice has kind of always been that simple. So again, it's the accumulation, compaction, and recrystallization of snow. And then on that the next sub bullet point, each winter, more snow must accumulate than melts during the summer, so that some snow is left over. So that is a requirement in order for a glacier to form in the first place, is that each winter you have to have a certain amount of snow accumulate, and in the summer you can't melt all of it. You need to leave some of it behind for the next year. And then over and over and over. And that's how you build a glacier, is that you've got more snow accumulating in the winter than what's melting during the summer months. And that's how you can build up this large thing. So glaciers do not completely melt during the summer. If a bunch of ice that's on a mountain does melt during the summer, then it, reaccumulates, but then melts again the next summer, we would not qualify that as a glacier. It has to be there year round, or some of it has to be there year round. So the last bullet point that you guys can fill in there is that a glacier, this is just a simplification of what I just said, survives year to year. So it's got to be there year round. Got to be there for multiple years. It can't just all melt in the summer. So let's start thinking about some reasons about why we should care. So anybody care in the chat to maybe throw down some ideas for why we care at all about glaciers? Why bother learning about these big things of ice that sit on mountains? Like, what might be important about that? It is very important, by the way. It's extremely important. It's very important here in the Pacific Northwest too. Freshwater preservation, yeah. So we have a lot of fresh water on our planet right now because we still have a lot of glacial ice on it. That glacial ice is melting, which is kind of sad, and then it's going to go into the ocean, and it's going to become salt water. And we can't drink salt water right out of the ocean. Flooding if it melted too fast, yeah, absolutely. And then there's immense floods too, like in the springs when it snows a lot and whatnot. Protecting coastal communities, yes. Knowing about glaciers, particularly those that are near coastal communities, is important, such as here in the Pacific Northwest. And then also any coastal community, as Noah's saying, cares about glaciers, because if all the glaciers melt and go into the ocean, that's actually an insane amount of water. That is enough water to raise sea level. If sea level rises, all the houses that are built on the ocean right next to the beach could, if they are flat and on the same plane as the ocean and they're not like high up, then that means that their home is going to become flooded or just completely underwater. A lot of Bangladesh is that way, where it doesn't really rise up. Like if this is the beach right here, the land doesn't really go like this very much. It just kind of stays flat. And if sea level rises, all that flat area is just going to get flooded completely. And the majority of the country of Bangladesh, I think it's near India, is like that. So yeah, coastal communities really care about glaciers and keeping them the way that they are and not melting them. And also, again, back to freshwater preserves, the best water I've ever had was through a life straw, actually. These are great to add to your emergency kits, especially in your car, or just great to take with you hiking. Because my friend brought one hiking with a small group of us, and when we got to Lake Kalchak, which is an amazing hike in Leavenworth, if you're a hiker and you don't mind an 8 or 9 mile hike round trip, I highly recommend going to Lake Kalchak. It's on the way to the enchantments. He brought a life straw with us, and there was this fresh groundwater natural spring right up by the lake. And of course, the water that's coming out of the ground there is fresh melt water off of a glacier that is there up by the lake that you can literally walk up to. And the water was so fresh. It was the best tasting water that any of us had ever tried. So glaciers have great fresh water. And a lot of our water here is actually glacial melt water that we consume in the Pacific Northwest. So let's go on to some additional reasons that I listed I listed some of these, and I also have probably maybe a few others listed on slide 4. Again, that sea level rise with the coastal communities, right? Drinking water is also an indicator of what our planet's doing. Is our planet going through a cooling cycle, or is it going through a warming cycle? These cycles do naturally happen during Earth's history, Milankovitch cycles, etc. We won't cover those here because we just don't have time. But the Earth naturally goes through these cycles of warming and cooling. And then on top of that, you add, the question of are humans messing with this warming and cooling cycle? And are we shooting ourselves in the foot or not? And we're not going to attempt to answer that question in this class, but I'm definitely going to teach you guys about looking at glaciers as an indicator of what's happening with the global climate, right? Because ice ages versus interglacial periods. So global temperatures also affect climates, and that sounds very obvious, but what does that mean? It means that places that are nice, lush tropical forests could not be nice, lush tropical forests. And it means that areas that are farmable right now could also become arid and not farmable. That would be a very bad day, because then a lot of our, right now we have a lot of area of land on our planet that is farmable. And if it gets significantly warmer, we won't have as much farmable land. It'll be pushed more northward, first of all. It'll be in farther north and farther south towards the poles. And in addition, there just won't be as much of it. So this is a big deal, right? And also, if everything is covered in ice, then we really don't have hardly any farmable land either. So habitat's also important. I did a report on, I think it was the emperor penguins or some penguins at one point in college, and I found out that in 100 years they could go extinct. And that's really sad. And that's based on the way things are currently going. And we should care about penguins. We should care about these unique ecosystems and habitats, because they affect us in a way. Anyways, you guys should take ecology. I bet that I think Alicia's into ecology and could probably even tell me more about that than I know. I like rocks. I know a lot about rocks. But in any case, let's move on and start talking about how you turn snow into glacial ice. Kind of that process from start to finish. And we'll start on slide 5. So, from snowfall to glacial ice. Snow falls initially like sediment and accumulates in layers with each snowfall. And you can see that accumulation of layers in the bottom photo there on slide 5. The photo, particularly on the left, you see actually layers in the snow on that glacier. So the second bullet point there is that a fresh snowfall, so fresh snowfalls, they're full of air in between all of the individual snowflakes. So fresh snowfalls are very light and fluffy, and there's a lot of air in between each snowflake. They're kind of barely touching each other. And the snowflakes themselves are rather intricate and whatnot. And so it's not just a ball of ice. It's this pretty intricate design that's wonderful in every way and has plenty, makes for great air pockets. So looking at slide 6, you can kind of see a depiction of that in the diagram there on the left, where the top kind of zoomed in portion there shows those intricate snowflakes and how there's plenty of open space in the snowflake itself and in between the snowflakes. So the next bullet point that we're going to write, the first bullet point on slide 6, which is really just a continuation from slide 5, the next step in creating a glacier is going to be that more snow is going to fall after this first initial fluffy light snowfall. So we get more snow falling on top of it. Then the second bullet point is that that snow actually compacts under the weight of new snow. So the first snow that fell is going to get squished a little bit under the weight of new snow. This forms, and we're still on that second bullet point there, this forms something called firn, and how that is spelt, because it's a Nordic word, I think, is firn, right there, F-I-R-N. So, and firn, it just means that it's in the process where there is now less air in between those snowflakes. And you can see that progression again on that graph or the diagram there on the left-hand side, where the third picture down, it actually is labeled firn. The picture above it is, there's like, new snow, right? Loose snow. There's granular snow. And then you have firn when you've really started kind of crunching down on older snowfalls, compacted into firn. Eventually, though, and this is going to be that last bullet point there, eventually, this compacts to form ice with almost no air. So firn then turns into eventually solid ice that has almost no air in it. And the picture kind of in the bottom center there is actually a thin section of ice where they cut a chunk of glacial ice like really thin, and then they put it under a microscope. And all the kind of really tiny dark gray spots that are just all over everything in there are little air bubbles. And the larger kind of, some of them are white, some of them are black, some of them are blue or gray. Those are all different individual ice crystals that used to be snowflakes, but they've gotten very compacted, and now there's just these teeny tiny little pockets of ice in there. Slide 7 also is just another depiction of this, where we see snow turning into firn, then turning into glacial ice, and seeing how there's more air in snow, less air in firn, and then almost no snow in glacial ice the deeper you get into the glacier. Oh, excuse me, I almost feel like I'm going to sneeze. So let's take a quick look at slide 8 then. And this slide already has all the text filled in because it is an outline of what we are about to go over. There are two main categories of glaciers. There are mountain glaciers, and we will define what qualifies a glacier as being a mountain glacier. And then there are continental glaciers. That's the next category. We're not going to go into any like subcategories for continental glaciers, but mountain glaciers have a lot of subcategories that we will be going into, or at least subtypes of glaciers listed there. So let's go ahead and define mountain glacier on the next slide, on slide 9. So mountain glaciers are classified by shape as well as their position. So what do I mean by that? I mean that different mountain glaciers have different shapes. Like the glacier as a whole has a different shape than a different type of glacier. And then also these glaciers are located at different spots on a mountain range. And being that they're located in different places on a mountain range is what allows them to have that different shape. So slide 10 there, we'll talk about our first type of glacier. The first type of glacier that we are going to talk about is a cirque glacier. And if you are wondering how to spell cirque, it is there on the slide. It's spelled in both pictures on the slide there, but in case you don't have the slide up, I will spell it there. Cirque, kind of a fun word, interesting word to try to spell. Cirque, as I've heard some people call it, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be pronounced cirque. So cirque glaciers, let's give you guys a definition here, fill mountaintop bowls, basically. So usually mountain peaks on either side or on some sides of it will have this kind of like bowl shape, and this glacier will sit in that round bowl shape, and these glaciers will be kind of rounded as a result. And you can see a photograph there on that slide showing some cirque glaciers on the side of a mountain, and the diagram there also shows this kind of rounded cirque glacier on it as well. I'm not a huge fan of the photograph there on that slide, and I wanted to find a different one for it, but we'll see better pictures later on in the lecture of cirque glaciers. But they really do sit on the side of mountains in these kind of bowls, like bowl-shaped crevices in the mountain. So let's talk about the next type of mountain glacier on the next slide. So the next type of glacier that we are going to define is a mountain ice cap. And a mountain ice cap is a mound of ice that submerges peaks of mountains. Or I think that's actually incorrect. That submerges everything but the very peaks of mountains. So if you look at the image below, you can see that there is a bunch of what appears to be snow, and there probably is snowfall on top of it, but it's a bunch of glacial ice that is completely submerging, not completely, but is nearly submerging the entire landscape. And the only thing that you can see of the landscape below is just the very teeniest, tiniest tips of the mountains that are poking through. This is going to get somewhat confusing with continental glaciers. What you need to know here is that this is contained within a mountain range and does not extend over a continent. It is still contained in a mountain range. So kind of like wrapping or something. It's like wrapping something that is really like has a lot of sharp, pokey edges all over it. And the corners are all like poking out of the, wrapping paper around this very spiky object that you're trying to wrap. Yeah, you can kind of think of it like that. My brother and I may have intentionally wrapped presents this way in the past. We like to have a lot of fun in my family. We've done some very interesting things with wrapping presents. Yeah, including my husband asked for an Ethernet cord that was 50 feet long. And so my brother wrapped all of the gifts inside, like he wound the 50 feet of cord all around the other gifts. So the other gifts were inside the ball. Anyways, moving right along, let's talk about, we still need to fill in the second bullet point there for you guys on mountain glaciers, or on mountain ice caps, excuse me. So ice actually flows. This is crazy, I know, but ice actually does flow like a river. It's just really slow. And in a mountain glacier, ice flows outward from the thickest part of the ice cap. Typically, the thickest part is in the center, but basically wherever the snow has accumulated the most and it's become thickest, the ice does actually flow outward from that point on an ice cap. And that's different than a cirque, because in a cirque, it's just going to, usually that bowl is going to have a lower side, and it's just going to flow out and down the lower side of the bowl, because usually they're actually on the side of a mountain. Whereas this is like this giant expanse covering multiple mountains, and it flows outward from the thickest part of the cap. So let's now talk about the next type of glacier. The next type of glacier is a valley glacier, and that is also spelled for you on the diagram in the bottom corner of slide 12. Valley glaciers, as you might expect, are confined to a valley by valley walls. So basically, within mountain ranges, there are natural valleys in these mountains. And ice will sometimes be contained to that valley, kind of looking almost like a river, just like what you see in that picture below, where you have these channels in the mountains, these valleys, and all the glacial ice that sits in the bottom of it. And the glacier is not so large that it overtakes the valley, but that it is confined within it. Yes, and glacial ice can, we're going to talk more about erosion on Wednesday, but glacial ice can take what was like a baby valley and carve it into this massive, expansive valley that's ridiculously, hundreds of times bigger than what it was before. Or it can just make a valley. Glaciers are these very massive erosional forces. They're kind of like bulldozers that really ravage the landscape. And they just move so slowly that you can't really tell that it's happening. All right. So also, it looks like Alicia's internet is being inconsistent. I definitely recommend trying another device, such as if you're on a laptop, then trying a smartphone, or vice versa. If one device is having trouble connecting to the internet using like Wi-Fi, sometimes it can be better than to use a phone and try it on its data plan and see if it's getting better service that way when Wi-Fi is kind of being finicky, or when data is being kind of finicky. Sometimes your Wi-Fi might be providing better connection. Also, Ethernet cords. You probably don't need one that's 50 feet though. So let's go ahead then and fill in that second bullet point on valley glaciers. As I kind of already said this, they flow like a river in a channel. They really do. It's just very slow. All right. Also, before we move on to the next slide, I will say that I want you guys to draw your attention to that photograph and look at those dark lines that are on the sides of those valley glaciers, as well as in the middle of those glaciers. We're actually going to talk about what those dark lines are, and we're going to define that. So remember that you saw those here. And also notice too that in this photograph, we're seeing two valley glaciers further back in the photo flowing towards the camera and turning into one larger valley glacier. So valley glaciers can converge into a larger valley. That's not uncommon. So let's talk about the third type of glacier. I think we're on our fourth. Woohoo. Our next type of glacier that we're going to talk about is a Piedmont glacier. That is also spelt on the slide below, but I will throw it here because it's kind of tiny. So that is a Piedmont glacier that you're checking out there. Piedmont glaciers spread out at the end of a valley. So some valleys, most valleys, will eventually end at a spot where the land becomes very flat and the land widens out and the confining walls of the valley end. And from there, when the ice reaches the end of that, it's like, oh, hey, I don't have these like walls on either side of me keeping me in the channel. So I'm just gonna like make myself at home and, spread out here. So these Piedmont glaciers, some people call them like elephant's foot. They kind of look like elephant's feet because they like spread out like that. So let's go ahead and look at slide 14. Normally in a normal class, I would have people actually like come up to the the overhead projector screen, and I would have you guys actually try your hand at identifying glaciers that are in this photograph here, because every type of mountain glacier except Piedmont glaciers are pictured there. So you have many cirques in this picture. You have a mountain ice cap, and there are also many valley glaciers in here. So go ahead and take a look at the photo. I guess for now what we'll do is we'll just take a look at the photo, and I'll have you guys kind of like scope out some spots where you think there may or may not be a feature, where you guys think that the ice cap might be, the mountain ice cap, as well as the valley glaciers, the cirques, and all that good stuff. So there are plenty of valleys that are there's one on the left-hand side of the photo that's kind of going from the back of the photo towards the front of the photo. There's also one almost at the bottom of the photo, a valley glacier that's kind of flowing across from right to left on the photograph. Actually, it's probably flowing left to right, just because of where all the dirt is. There's more dirt on the right-hand side of that valley glacier than there is on the left-hand side of that valley glacier. And then also, yes, towards the right and bottom of the photo, indeed. And there's plenty of cirque glaciers. So pretty much if you're looking at anywhere where it looks like there kind of might be somewhat of an ish bowl type shape sitting in a mountain, right? And there's like a bunch of ice in there, that's a cirque glacier. It doesn't need to be a perfect bowl shape, just like what we saw on the cirque slide. They weren't quite perfect bowl shapes, but when that snow melts away, you'll see that it's pretty like scooped out on the bottom underneath those glaciers. But in any case, let's go ahead then and move on, since I can't have you guys come up and identify and be like, good job, guys, you got it right. I love doing that. If I will tell you too that your hunch is probably right. I don't think I've ever had anyone actually like get one wrong. So your instincts are probably good on that. So let's go ahead and talk about the next type of glacier, continental glaciers, and we're not really going to talk about like subtypes. So a continental glacier continental glaciers are vast ice sheets that cover large land areas. And when I say large land areas, again, difference between this and a mountain ice cap is that a mountain ice cap is going to be confined within the mountain range. A continental glacier is not. It will cover a much larger land area than just the mountain region, cover the whole continent. Greenland is an example of this, where the whole thing is covered in ice, except the very, very margins. So you can visit Greenland. People live there. They live on the perimeters of the ice. So the second bullet point that you can add onto this is that ice flows outward from the thickest part of the sheet. And that is just like as with a mountain ice cap, right? You're going to have ice flowing out from the thickest part. Yes, and then the next notable continental glacier that we have on Earth today, go ahead and take a look at slide 16, is Antarctica. So 2 major continental ice sheets exist today. They are Antarctica and Greenland. So again, I'll repeat that because I just checked and I'm like, oh, I didn't even leave any of that blank for you guys. 2 major continental ice sheets exist today. They are Antarctica and Greenland. However, I will point out to you guys, just on a side note, that in the past, continental glaciers have existed over like North America, like most of North America, and like parts of Eurasia as well. So, for example, wherever you're sitting right now, whichever city you're in, as long as you're not like south of Tacoma, basically, or south of Olympia, wherever you're sitting, if you live north of Olympia, was covered in miles and miles thick of glacier at one point. And like all of the Puget Sound was covered by miles of glacial ice and Whidbey Island, etc. And we can prove this by looking at glacial erosional features, because these glaciers, they don't leave the land unscathed. They leave behind very specific erosional features that we can find, and we find them all across the northern United States, all across Canada, and also all across parts of like Russia and other countries that are more northward. So, and yeah, so basically we've had like an ice planet before, practically, during ice ages. Yeah, the prevailing idea for the formation of the Puget Sound is that it was completely carved by glaciers. What was the name of that? The Puget Lobe was part of the, I don't remember the name of the giant, what they called the continental glacier that was here. It escapes me at the moment, but it's not exactly what we're going to be talking about today, because we're just going to be defining glaciers in general. So we're going to watch. Who would like to watch a video? Who's up for watching 5 minutes of a video right now? Or please comment in the chat if you would just rather do that on your own later. Let me know. So 5-minute video now or on your own time? Because this one's definitely longer than any of the other clips I've shown you guys. But it's so good. Like, I don't know, the way that they present the information, as well as all the visuals that they have for you guys, which are well beyond what I can provide just sitting here, as well as with photographs, is so good. Okay, so I got at least 3 people who are like, I'm down. 3 people. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's get this pulled up here. So this is How Do Glaciers Move? So, and this is by a YouTube channel called It's Okay to Be Smart. And we're going to be going more in depth, and we will be going over everything that he says. And also the link is there in the PowerPoint for you guys if you want to pull it up and watch it on your own screen, which I recommend. Be better than watching my shaking hands try to like hold it up for you guys. So let's go ahead and play that video for you guys.
Here's something we all take for granted. Liquid things flow like liquids, and solid things flow like, well, solid things don't flow, right? Not so fast.
Glaciers are cool, and not just because they're made of ice. I'm here at Mendenhall Glacier, which is one of about 40 glaciers in the Juneau ice field. Glaciers are cool because the way that they move, even the very fact that they move, seems to defy physics. It's a solid that flows like a liquid. How? That is a question of glacial proportions.
To figure out how a glacier moves, first let's go back to the beginning. Not that beginning. The beginning of the glacier. And first, we've got to get up there.
I'm super excited. I've never been in a helicopter before, and we're going to take this thing up to the top of a glacier.
This ice is born in the ocean. Warm, moist air from the Pacific rises up coastal mountains where it cools, condenses, and falls as snow and rain. 30 meters of snow, sometimes more, falls in this ice field every year.
You need more than a mountain of snow to make a glacier. You also need the right climate. Even in summer, it's summer here right now, even though it doesn't look like it. It dips below freezing here. And what that means is the accumulation of snow in winter, it exceeds the snowmelt in summer. And this lets the snow pile up layer after layer every year. A cubic meter of snow weighs anywhere from 70 to 150 kilograms, about the same as 1 or 2 adult humans. But most of that volume is air. As it piles up, the collective force on all of that fluffy stuff begins a transformation. Working hard here. First, all those pretty little snowflake shapes are totally shattered into smaller grains. As they're packed together, the air pockets between them shrink. The snow becomes denser. After about 2 years, ground snow transitions into a new form called firn. Firn is an intermediate form between snow and glacier ice. It's about 2/3 the density of water, and it can take many more years for that to transition into its final form.
That final form is a big mass of dense, bubble-free ice. The ice in Mendenhall is flowing forward more than a half meter every day. Glaciers are often compared to rivers of ice, and that's not wrong. These giant solid structures behave with liquid-like tendencies.
I know what you're thinking. Ice moves because it melts, but glaciers can move without melting. Mendenhall is pretty solid. I mean, I could jump up and down on it. It doesn't deform it, but these short-term stresses don't do anything. Long-term stress, like bearing its own enormous weight, can bend and deform this ice.
What we're told makes something a solid rather than a liquid is that its atoms and molecules are so tightly bonded they can't move past each other. But this isn't the case with glacial ice. Its water molecules are arranged in an orderly pattern, but under certain conditions, they can still flow. Much of this has to do with the pressure melting point. As pressure increases, the melting point of ice decreases. When glacier ice stays close to but just below that point, it becomes malleable, much like how you can bend and deform solid metal when it's heated near its melting point.
Watch out for that. The deepest layers of a glacier are subjected to the most pressure. That's the zone of plastic flow, because the bonds between the ice crystals can be stretched rather than broken.
Here, the molecular bonds between ice crystals actually stretch and slide past each other rather than break, like how a deck of cards deforms as cards slide past each other. Magic. When the bottom of the glacier needs to move around large obstacles like boulders, even higher pressures on the uphill side cause the ice to melt, flow around the obstacle, and refreeze on the other side.
As these processes continue, the glacier creeps along, propelled by gravity, like some giant gooey conveyor belt. But up here in the top of the glacier, this upper 150 feet or so, that's the zone of brittle flow. And the ice isn't under as much pressure, so when it's stressed, it's prone to cracking, which is why we see these beautiful crevasses and things like this.
Imagine a candy bar warping around a curved surface. The top has to curve farther, faster, so it cracks while the gooey bottom bends and stretches. Some glacier movement comes from slipping on sediment or a thin layer of water, but most glaciers not at Earth's poles move by this process of deforming. But glaciers are a product of climate, and they change with the climate. Mendenhall Glacier is currently slinking along a 13-mile journey to its lowest point, Mendenhall Lake. The terminal edge of a glacier is one of the easiest places to see its movement in action, but it's also where we can see how much things are changing. Glaciers never move backwards, and they're always melting. But when mass melts away at the bottom faster than new mass is added up top, they can recede.
It takes about 200 years for new ice to move from the ice field down here to the lake. That's a slow process, but warmer summers combined with less snowfall in winter mean that things are speeding up. The glacier is retreating faster than it's growing. Where I'm standing today was covered in ice just a few decades ago. Glaciers like this are an example of climate change that we can see in our own lifetimes. The physics of how they move is really cool.
Okay. Let it go for a little bit longer, but you guys can finish the tiniest bit of the rest of it later. But yeah, the physics of how glaciers move, that's on my arm from sitting on the table. But the physics of how glaciers move is actually really cool. And that's what we're going to be talking about. I love the candy bar illustration too. And it makes me also want a candy bar. So let's go ahead and get the slides pulled back up here on the side. All right. So, excuse me. I almost feel like I'm going to sneeze again. No. All right. So, glaciers. Let's look at slide 18 there. Oh, man. On the verge of sneezing. So, let's fill in all those blanks there on slide 18 for you. Glacial ice movement. Glacial ice moves slowly. Slowly is the only word that you have to fill in on that first blank. So glacial ice moves slowly. Second bullet point there, it is gravity driven. So glacial ice movement is driven by the fact that gravity is always trying to pull everything down. And if the glacier is on a mountain that is, not completely flat, it's going to flow down. Third bullet point that you guys can fill in on there is that mountain walls channel the movement of the glacier. So mountain walls are going to act as barriers, right? Especially, and even at like the edges of like an ice cap, mountain walls are going to affect, which way the glacial ice is going to go. So in that fourth bullet point there, what you can write out is that in open areas, glacial ice is going to spread out. Just as you have with an ice sheet, such as like a continental glacier, or in a Piedmont glacier, right? Okay, so here's where my slide numbers kind of differ a tiny bit from your guys's. So let's go ahead and take a look then at the next slide. So glacial ice movement, kind of just further defining this, specifically in like mountain glaciers where you have valley walls and things, kind of binding things. This is kind of a recap of the next one. It's a little bit redundant, but the first bullet point there is that it flows downhill under the, or because of gravity. It flows downhill because of gravity. And an important thing to note is that the glacial ice can flow up over relatively small inclines. So looking at the diagrams below where you have the honey, which is an analogy for a glacier, it moves a bit faster than glacial ice does. But it's still a fairly good analogy that we can use and see some movement in. And you can see that in the diagram, they're showing that even if there were some like, small bumps and inclines in the way of the honey flowing down the wooden plank that they're kind of dripping the honey down, the honey would still flow up and over those relatively small inclines. And glacial ice does the same thing. And that's also shown in the diagram with the glacial ice, where there's a relatively small incline compared to the complete incline of the downward valley. It can still flow up and over that. So looking at the movement of a continental glacier, or say something that is kind of more like a mountain ice cap, they've got some diagrams there on slide 20, where what you're looking at is that the landscape relative to the glacier is relatively flat. And so it's more analogous to pouring honey over a flat plank, just because now the quantity of ice that we're dealing with when we're talking about continental glaciers or even kind of mountain ice caps is just far greater than the other valley glaciers. Those have much less ice. And in this case, the way that the flow is rather from like, topographic high to topographic low. It's more just that wherever the thickest accumulation is of the material, it's the rest of the material is going to flow out from that thickest point, as we see with the honey as an analogy, right? Has anyone here ever made pancakes? You can do this making pancakes too, pouring the pancake batter into the frying pan. You'll see that as you pour it in, all of the batter spreads out from the spot that you're pouring down on this flat surface, right? However, if you were to be pouring it down the sides of, say, an incline or like a mountain, it would just run down the sides and flow from topographic high to topographic low. So that's just kind of a little bit of a subtle difference there for what we're seeing in between those two. So let's see, my slides are out of order from slide to slide. So slide 21, glacial ice movement. I did leave all of the kind of words there on that slide for you guys. Let's see. Did that for the next couple of slides, few slides. Basically, what we're looking at here, I'm actually not sure that our book talks about it in this depth, but that's okay. We're going to just like introduce you guys to it anyways. So there are some ways that ice can move. So you kind of have the before picture on the bottom left there, and that's showing a bunch of glacial ice crystals that are all nice and compacted together, and they're not even really showing any air in between those different ice crystals, right? And then you can have internal plastic deformation, which can cause either recrystallization, so it can melt and then recrystallize those crystals. Sometimes, rather than just melting and recrystallizing, it will stretch those ice crystals. And sometimes, rather than just stretching the ice crystals, it will rotate the ice crystals. And those are ways that they can get the ice to move from, nature can get the ice to move from point A to point B. Also, another way that this happens too, on that second bullet point there, is that the crystals will sometimes just slide past one another on areas where there's kind of like, a bunch of crystal grain boundaries. You might just have some movement along, kind of almost like a fault line, moving along that way. And that is another way that you can get the ice to move downhill from point A to point B, or just spreading out from thickest part to thinner part. So slide 22 talks about crevasses, and this is what the candy bar illustration is excellent for. Who here has maybe heard of crevasses before on mountains, glaciers? Crevasses are terrifying because a lot of lives do get lost to crevasses because there are these incredibly deep cracks in a glacier. And when I say incredibly deep, I mean like stories, many like building stories deep sometimes. And the reason why people lose their lives to these is because you can't always see them when you are on the ground level and you're just walking straight forward. You might not be able to tell that there is a large crack in the snow a few feet in front of you, and people are not watching the ground extraordinarily carefully. They will fall into these because it is very easy to not see these things on glaciers until you are on the edge of it, until you're on the rim of a glacier. That's why if you guys ever want to hike like Mount Rainier or like Mount Baker or something like that, when there's like snow and you want to go hike over a glacier, you should get a guide who has done this many, many times before and can guide you. But anyways, so talking a bit more about crevasses, in glaciers, the upper portion of the glacier is a bit more brittle. And by brittle, I mean something that doesn't stretch or bend very easily. And why is that? Well, I mean, if I were to grab just a small little ice cube here and try to like bend it, it's too brittle. It's not going to. However, if I add a bunch of weight on top of that ice cube, and by a bunch of weight, I mean many, many pounds, I could eventually get it to deform. So below about 60 meters, the surface of the glacier, that area is subject to ductile plastic deformation. So I wish I could show you guys kind of this video. I've seen this video before of people will take like a cylinder, like this pillar of rock, and then they'll put it between two like vices that are like, I don't know, hydraulic presses or whatever. And they will actually get the rock to slowly deform and bend into kind of like, instead of just a nice cylinder, it will deform so that there's like a giant like ball in the center of it. And ice will do the same thing. In fact, it will probably do it easier. So what you have as a result, though, is when the glacier flows over like ridges in the topography, the lower layers, which are under pressure and are able to flow a bit more plastic-like, they will be fine and they'll just go over it and then there'll be no damage to the glacier. However, on top, it's more brittle, so it will crack as it flows over a topographic change at the base of the glacier. And what I mean by that is like if the glacier goes down a steep incline or up and over a tiny, tiny little hill at its base, the top will crack. And that's, again, just like taking that candy bar and bending the candy bar. Underneath, by where your thumbs are when you bend the candy bar, there's a lot of pressure going on down there. It also, as the narrator in the film that we just watched said, he also adds on the point too that the top layer, when it's going over some topography and bending, it has to move farther than the base does. So not only is the base, got this advantage of it's under a lot of pressure and it can deform kind of more ductile and more plastic-like, the top of it is brittle and has to move farther. So you get these cracks in the top of it. All right, guys, believe it or not, we're almost done. We're kind of covering half of a chapter this week, but we're just doing it really in depth. So our lectures should hopefully be a little bit shorter, except I'm going to add a ton of extra stuff onto Wednesday's lecture that's not in your book. Trust me, it's worth it. But anyways, so I think that we will finish up here in 20 or less minutes. So let's take a look then at slide 23. So flow velocities are going to vary within a glacier. And this is really important. So I want you guys to actually bold some of the words on this slide because you may be tested on questions like this. And this is too also not unlike a normal liquid river instead of a solid river. In any case, the fastest part of the glacier is in the center of the glacier, the fastest moving part. It's going to flow fastest in the center. And it's going to flow slower on the bottom of the glacier as well as along the sides of the glacier when that's applicable, because not all glaciers are flowing along a side, like have a side like that, like a valley glacier does, or a cirque glacier. Flowing along the bottom, slower on the bottom, the sides when that's applicable. And why? Because there's friction. The ice dragging across the ground or across mountain walls on either side of it is going to slow down the movement. Whereas in the middle, it doesn't have the extra friction from solid mountain rock, and it's able to flow faster. You could probably see this too if you were to get just the right kind of material onto like a wooden plank and then like bend it over, and then you'd see the center of that kind of maybe more liquidy material fall down faster than on the edges and on the bottom. We can also track this because there have been studies where scientists will go up to mountains and onto glaciers, and they have put wooden pegs in the glacier, like a valley glacier, from one side to the other side in the midst of this channel. And then they've come back sometime later, and these pegs in the center of the glacier are much farther forward than the pegs on the sides, and it kind of forms this U shape, right? So that's pretty cool that you can actually like track it just by putting a physical object in the ice and then seeing it, deform that way. So slide 24 is going to be important as well. Got a lot of blanks to fill in here. All right. So there are a few zones. There's 2 zones of a glacier. And spoiler alert, they are on the diagram below. There is the first one that we're going to talk about is the zone of accumulation. And accumulation, spelled just like you would expect, it's also there on the slide. So zone of accumulation. What defines the zone of accumulation? This is the part of the glacier where you have a net accumulation of snow each year. So a net accumulation of snow every year. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that, again, is just what I said kind of earlier, where a glacier needs to have more snow accumulating in the winter than what's melting off in the summer. Now, when I told you that, I wasn't being super specific because I was talking about a glacier as a whole. However, if we break a glacier up into different parts, we will see that some parts of the glacier are experiencing what I just mentioned. However, other parts of the glacier may not necessarily be experiencing the same net accumulation over, year to year. So that is why it's important to break these up. And we will talk about that other section in just a moment. So in the zone of accumulation, material flows downward. So we have a downward flow. And why do we have a downward flow? Well, I assume that part of that is because you've got more snow piling up on top because you're accumulating in this zone, right? So the flow trajectory is going to be more down, focused downwards as it flows on, right? Now we need to talk about the second zone, though, in a glacier, and that is the zone of ablation. That is also spelt on the slide there, but in case you don't have that, it's a weird word we don't use it on a regular basis, so I'll write that down there for you guys. Ablation. So in the zone of ablation, there's actually a net loss of snow and ice. Because glaciers don't go on for forever, right? So if we're accumulating snow, at some point on the glacier, at some point in time, there's eventually going to be a loss, right? And then you kind of have to take that into consideration for the glacier as a whole. Like, is the zone of accumulation larger than the zone of ablation? And is the rate of accumulation faster than the rate of melting in the zone of ablation? And that's going to affect a glacier growing versus shrinking. But in any case, so zone of ablation is where you have a net loss of snow and ice, meaning each year you do not have more snow accumulating than what's melting in the summer. Right now on Earth, the zone of ablation of most glaciers is larger than the zone of accumulation, and also the rate of loss in the zone of accumulation is much greater than the rate of accumulation up in the zone of accumulation. So basically the glacier is going to be shrinking, is what we're seeing in most glaciers right now. And in the zone of accumulation, there is actually an upward flow. Ice actually flows upwards towards the top of the glacier. And then there is also on slide 25 a very important term to define here, and that is the equilibrium line. The equilibrium line is what separates the zone of accumulation and the zone of ablation. It's where the zone of accumulation stops and the zone of ablation begins. There's also another term that will be very useful for us going forward in talking about glaciers, and that term is called the terminus, also known as aka the toe of the glacier. And when I say toe, I really mean like spelled like, you know, like a toe. No fancy spelling here. So the terminus or toe of a glacier is the very end of a glacier. So you can see it should be melted. I was reading while I was talking. It is labeled on that diagram there below that they're kind of pointing to the very edge of the glacier, and they're saying, hey, that's the terminus, also known as the toe of the glacier. We also in geology use this term for the toe of a landslide as well. All right, now that we've talked about the zone of accumulation, the zone of ablation, and we've talked about the equilibrium line between those two, and we also now know what the toe of a glacier is, we can finally start to talk about glaciers shrinking and growing, which is also known as glacial advance and retreat, although I kind of flipped those two terms around. So on slide 26, let's define those terms. You may have actually heard the narrator in the video. He used the terms advance and retreat, right? So let's actually give us some working definitions here. So glacial advance is when the whole glacier has a net accumulation. Whole glacier has a net accumulation, and it grows in size, and the toe of the glacier is also going to extend outward further. So what I mean from that is point A to point B, is gonna, the terminus is gonna, you know, extend outward. So glacial retreat, however, is the exact opposite. Glacial retreat is when you have a net loss of snow and ice. And the glacial shrinks, and the glacier's toe recedes as well. So what I mean by net loss, again, is that we're not getting as much snow in the winters as what we're melting off in the zone of ablation. And you guys may be wondering about that weird word ablation. It does actually have a meaning, and as you may guess, ablation literally does mean melting or sublimation of snow and ice. So melting, we all know what that is. That's when like you set down an ice cube and then it turns to water. But ablation refers to both melting and sublimation. I'll spell that for you guys. I know I'm a terrible speller and I would want it spelled for me. So sublimation, though, is when you set out an ice cube and it goes away, but you don't have a puddle of water because it literally just all went to vapor instead of transitioning into that liquid phase. You can actually see this if you're driving along the pass. I've seen it driving towards Eastern Washington when there was a bunch of snow out and the sun was also out, and it was kind of earlier in the morning, and there was hot sun beating down on the snow that was on the ground, and you saw steam rising up from the snow on the ground. And that, my friends, is sublimation. So if you ever see that, you can be like, whoa, I'm witnessing something going directly from solid to vapor. So these next few slides here basically just show kind of the glacial advance and retreat. And the equilibrium line is a good reference for this because when the glacier is advancing, the equilibrium line as well as the toe are going to move farther out from the start of the glacier. When there is retreat, the equilibrium line and the toe of the glacier are going to end up becoming closer to the glacier. And it's not that the glacier ice is flowing backwards. It's just that so much of it is melting off at the terminus that the terminus disappears. And because the toe of the glacier is just disappearing and melting or sublimating, it appears as though the toe and the equilibrium line are moving backwards. And it's not that they're flowing backwards or anything like that. It's just that stuff's just melting. So if you go ahead and kind of like quickly go through slides 30, 31, and 32, you can see that they have color-coded the position of the toe of the glacier and move it around, as well as the equilibrium line, and move it out and farther, so that you can see times of glacial advance and times of glacial retreat. And in all of these pictures, they are drawing the flow lines of the ice going down the mountain. They never go back up. It's just that, you know, the bottom half of the glacier disappears and melts and sublimates during retreat. And it's a matter of the fact that we're not replenishing the toe of the glacier with enough ice to balance out how much of it is melting and sublimating off. So let's go ahead and take a brief look at our last slide, slide 33, which is just meteorites and glaciers. There's not really any notes here to take so much as just really, really awesome facts, which is that meteorites fall on glaciers, and they make for really good meteorite hunting because meteorites tend to be very dark in color, and glacial ice is very extraordinarily light in color. And so meteorites kind of stick out like a sore thumb on a glacier. And not only that, but like we can also see for meteorites that may have been entering, meteors that may have been entering the Earth's atmosphere and then close to the surface of the Earth, they break up into smaller bits of meteor, and you get what's called a strewn field. And you can actually find like meteor strewn fields in Antarctica, which is really cool. There's not a bunch of like grass and trees covering them. But yeah, so interesting meteorite hunting in Antarctica, right? Also, you can see that meteorites will sometimes get incorporated into the flow of the glacier, say in a zone of accumulation, and then they'll have that downward flow into the ice. And then in a zone of ablation where there is upward flow, those meteors will flow upward again and collect on the surface of the melting ice. So, yeah, slide 30. I don't know that. Oh yeah, that was your guys' slide 30. But anyways, there's a couple slides on the end there, but those are for next time. Yeah. So that ends our lecture for today. Again, those focus questions aren't up right now for glaciers, but they will be soon in a few hours. Does anyone have any questions though before I go? Would anyone like to do, does anyone have questions and they want to ask them in like a live chat? If you do want to ask questions in a live chat, then go ahead and leave your name below. I see that no one wants to do one. If anyone else would also like to, go ahead and leave your name in the chat below. And if not, have a wonderful evening and enjoy the sun. The sun came back out for us, which is lovely. Let's see. Oh, also, the 5 of you who are still there, the extra credit deadline was extended because I don't care as much about extra credit deadlines. And really want everyone to make an emergency kit because it's so important that you stay safe during an earthquake. So you guys have another week to assemble or acquire all of the things in your home to make an emergency kit. Highly recommend. And just photograph what you've assembled, or if you bought stuff, photograph all of that. Please don't. It says like in the flyer, you know, to include things like your ID and whatnot, or any medications that you take in your emergency kit. You don't necessarily need to do that. Number one, because most people have their IDs on them all the time anyways, and most people like actually keep their medications like in a specific spot in their house and don't stockpile it. That's probably for the best, to an extent, under normal circumstances. In any case, though, don't photograph stuff though, like your identification, or if you like take prescription medicines. I've had people do that in the past, and I now realize that I actually need to clarify. Don't photograph stuff that has personal information on it. I don't need to like know that necessarily. And it's okay to photograph just all the stuff like water bottles and you know, emergency food, a can opener if your emergency food is canned items, or flashlight, you know. What are some other great things to have? Perhaps like some other kind of utility tool. And there's a ton of other things listed. First aid kit is probably the best thing, the most important thing that you have there. Maybe even like a backup, like cell phone battery, you know, like an external battery or whatever. Stuff like that is great to have. A radio, actually, like a hand crank radio is wonderful to have in an emergency kit. And you can actually buy like on Amazon, like dual hand crank radios and stuff. Anywho, I could keep talking about that, but yeah. So looks like, all right. So I'll get the live chat invite sent out to Noah, and then we will meet back on Wednesday, and I'll see you guys then. All right. And I will end the live stream now. So have a great rest of the day and enjoy the sunshine.